Thank God for Evolution. And he's been doing conferences and presentations around the country for about hundreds and maybe thousands of them for about 15 years. And Betsy, he was a pastor with us in Massachusetts way at the beginning of our careers in ministry. Michael? Michael, glad to have you there.
Michael.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
And if the Spirit moves you and you decide to say something at any point, in fact, we're going to spend a minute introducing ourselves. And I'm not going to control that by appointing Tom or anybody to start. But whoever would like to start, simply spend a minute telling us where you're coming from and why this gathering is important to you.
And Michael, just so you know, we started recording this meeting.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
Well, I'm David Wheeler, and I've been an American Baptist pastor and theological educator for 40 years, and in both of those roles, reverence for God's creation and our responsibility for it has been front and center in my ministry.
David is a theology professor adjunct at Palmer Seminary.
That's great, thanks.
A resident theologian today.
I am Don Ng. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I serve denominationally in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, but I retired from a local church in San Francisco, American Baptist Church, about 5 years ago. I have come on to the Creation Justice Network and the American Baptist Witness as a vegetarian, convicted by my daughter, who is a vegan, and she's still waiting for me to give up cheese. But that's probably the only vice in ice cream, especially during the summer. But knowing that the way we consume animal products is one of the chief ways that we have polluted our water, air, and soil. So that's why I'm here, and my contribution to the cause.
Don's daughter, Lauren, is also on the national staff and was one of the people that we contacted to help us find out who should be here.
That's great.
Lauren and I always say that when you have two Ings in the same room, there's too many Ings. So we try to trade off. And no, she should be on this, in fact, rather than for me. But anyway, I'm here. Thank you.
Well, go ahead.
My name is Ken Witt. Obviously, I'm convening this gathering not on purpose. I was getting ready to publish a book entitled God is Just Love, Building Spiritual Resilience and Sustainable Communities for the Sake of Our Children and the Creation. And I decided it was past time to find out what was going on in the ABC, and I attended online a seminar that Rebecca was leading, and introduced myself to Tom Carr and then to David Wheeler, and ended up having conversations with all of you personally, you know, well over an hour each, and decided that we all really needed to be connected, and why we need to be connected, I hope we're about to find out. Oh, and I would add to that, Betsy used a phrase in her sermon that we referred to earlier, the fierce urgency of the now, which comes from a message by Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s. And pretty much as I talked to folk, we were pondering the possibility that we needed to light a fire under our denomination, our churches, ourselves, that things are a lot more urgent than our behavior and the planet towards the planet would indicate. Okay, Owen, go ahead.
Well, I'm Owen, and I've been around a while. I was on Jutsu Morikawa's staff, who led us in shaping the goal for the Home Mission Societies in 1972, which I think still is formative. structural change of institutions toward ecological wholeness and social justice at their points of intersection. And I think that's the test of whatever we do in terms of individual spirituality and in the church. Does it touch the institutions and structures toward eco-justice? And I'm very much looking forward to this meeting today. I think American Baptists have a tremendous power that has been given them by the Spirit that can carry us into a new era, because the denomination is thoroughly multiracial, multicultural. And the issues that have shaped the modern world require that kind of attention. And I think the changes that have occurred in the home mission societies and in other areas, since I left the staff, I just am kind of really pleased that the denomination has moved forward. And I think these issues are critical.
Okay.
The other thing I wanted to add was that in a book I read just a few days ago, The Half Has Never Been Told, just documents the degree to which America has been shaped by the frontier and expansion. And the consequences of that have been, there is a positive side, but there's a very negative side. It wouldn't have happened without genocide of Native people. It wouldn't have happened without slavery, which fueled the system of industrial development in the North with cotton, as well as other places. And it also resulted in ecocide, because as the slaves moved into one place after another, they basically were forced to cut the trees and create plantation-style agriculture. And I think those are changes that we have to pay attention to, because in the new order, we have to be in balance with each other and with nature. And I think American Baptists have a heritage, and I think Judson Morikawa still is our prophet for new age.
Thanks, Owen.
Well,
I will add quickly to that I was just making some notes to myself, and I decided that I was going to label Owen as a member of the communion of saints that's living and on earth and in heaven that surround us. I put Jujitsu Morikawa in the same place, which brings me back to my dad's era. And we have all these representatives, Martin Luther King, Walter Rauschenbusch, that are part of our heritage, and we must not forget that.
I'm Tom Carr. Right now, I'm in Suffield, Connecticut. One of the co-founders of the American Baptist Creation Justice Network. I've been engaged in this since the mid-late 80s. And a couple of years after, I really had this kind of epiphany that eco-justice is absolutely critical. Somehow, and I can't remember how, I got connected with Owen, who has been a mentor for all of these, for all of these years, and I'm engaged in a lot of different ways. And in particular, in Connecticut, for 20 years ago, we founded the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network. And if you're interested, 2.5 years ago, we put out a document, and it was based on the fierce urgency of now. It's a theological statement that we call "The Time Is Now." So, but the time is now.
In spades.
Yep.
I'm Betsy Sowers. Some of you remember me back when I worked at Tabcom in Massachusetts, when we used to have a Department of Church and Society. Basically my whole ministry has been around various forms of justice and interreligious work. And I'm technically retired, but I am Minister for Earth Justice at Old Cambridge Baptist Church, where Cody Sanders is the pastor. We're doing some amazing work there he's doing some amazing work with us around this apocalyptic moment and framing it biblically that way. And, you know, as the empire is coming apart, trying to keep us centered and keep us
So
working.
you just said a phrase. I want to make sure everybody
Yeah.
heard it.
What?
As the empire is coming apart.
Yes.
I also want to say quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt Betsy, but I don't want to forget, Betsy has a lot of other really good documents she could forward to you from her pastor and others in their community. Really good material if you want to do more reading.
Yeah, I think there's one I don't think that you've even seen, that Cody just did a pastoral letter to the church.
That I have that.
You have the pastoral letter, yeah.
Very good.
Last night we had a church-wide Zoom conversation about it, and it was just profound. But you know, we have to remember that in this ending of the empire, unfortunately, we're playing the Egyptians. So that's, you know, we're kind of working through all of that as a congregation and trying to work intersectionally, doing a new emphasis intersectionally at the work of creation justice and racial justice, and bringing those things together. I'm on the Alliance of Baptists Creation Justice Steering Committee, where Tom and I were on a panel a couple of years ago at an Inter-Baptist panel. But my ordination is ABC. My church is ABC/Alliance. And what else? Oh, and I live in a frontline community in Weymouth, Massachusetts, where actually today we're expecting FERC to go ahead, give Enbridge the go-ahead to start its compressor station that we've been fighting for almost 6 years and have delayed for almost 3 years, which sits, of course, next to 2 environmental justice communities, and, you know, long story. Yeah, that's how I spend a lot of my time. So I think that's enough for
Thanks, Betsy.
others. Yeah.
Rebecca, you're muted.
I am muted, yeah.
I just unmuted you.
But I can go next. I'm Rebecca Driscoll. I'm currently serving as the ABC Minister for Creation Justice through the Office of the General Secretary. And so I work with OGS and also with the Creation Justice Network. So Don and Tom and David are all on that network steering committee, to try to help figure out the best ways and resources and events and webinars that we can create and distribute to the denomination to talk about creation care and creation justice from a theological perspective that comes in a way that is potent and influential for everyone in our denomination. So we try really hard to make it so that our material and our resources and our message can reach everyone, and it doesn't, it alerts people to the urgency of what's going on, but doesn't scare them, doesn't overwhelm them, doesn't blame them, but is an invitation to contribute and to participate in this work of creation justice.
Awesome.
Great.
Guess I'll go next. My name's Dan Buttrey. I live in Detroit, Michigan, actually in the city of Hamtramck. Betsy, as you were talking about being a community at risk, we're a long walk from US Ecology, a wonderfully named company that deals with toxic products and how to deal with them. And they want to expand. And my wife, Sharon, I'm known in this area as Sharon's husband because she's one of the leading activists in the resistance to US Ecology. And they're doing a massive lawsuit. They kind of lost the effort to stop the expansion, long story, but now they've got a racism lawsuit against the Michigan department that was overseeing the permitting process.
We need to talk offline later.
With Sharon.
Because we're doing, we're doing that sort of thing too.
But anyway, I'm just in the process of retiring from being a global missionary with American Baptist International Ministries, doing conflict transformation stuff around the world, and sometimes that involved environmental issues, working with people in Indonesia about the burning of the forest and things like that. So peace and environment many times have intersected, and who are the people who benefit, who are the people who are harmed, those kind of questions. But my first demonstration I was a part of was in 1970, following the first Earth Day. I was a high school student. We started an organization and participated in the Earth Day actions, and then we had a protest that I was a part of organizing. And so it's always been a part of my DNA, if you will, and want to still work on this. Sharon and I were on vacation in the UK last September when the global climate strike happened, and we were in London. And so after going to see the Changing the Horse Guards, we joined in on the march with all the young people in London at the climate strike. And I actually put a slideshow together with a wonderful music soundtrack from Carrie, I'm blanking on her name, Carrie Newcomer. And if not now, tell me when. And a great song for action.
That's great. Dan, we're going to have to touch base later. I just moved to Ypsilanti, Michigan. So I'm Michael Dowd, and my wife, Connie Barlow, who's a science writer and an evolutionary educator. We've been traveling North America for the last 19 years, almost 19 years, speaking in every kind of secular and religious setting you can imagine, pretty much at the intersection of science, inspiration, and sustainability. And the last 8 years, I've been focusing specifically on abrupt climate change and intergenerational justice, and the rise and fall of civilizations, and what are the defining characteristics of empires and civilizations in contraction and in collapse. And so I've I think Ken mentioned back in the late 80s, I pastored at American Baptist, the United Church of Christ Federated Church in Granville, Massachusetts. I was on the Integrity of Creation, Justice, and Peace Task Force for the United Church of Christ for quite a while. And then in the mid-90s, I was the head of I was the religious organizer for the National Environmental Trust based in Washington, D.C. My job essentially was to help organize Jewish rabbis, Catholic priests, Protestant clergy, and evangelical and other clergy on key environmental issues that were coming up for a vote in Congress. And then for 5 years, I did sustainability organizing work in Portland, Oregon. And then, as I mentioned, for the last 18 and a half, 19 years, I've been living on the road with my wife. And just as of the last few days, settling into Ypsilanti, Michigan for the very first time, settling down. We've spoken to about 3,000 groups over the continent over the last 19 years. But our 4-month-old granddaughter and our youngest daughter and her husband and 4-month-old granddaughter are here in Ypsilanti, and we're 2 blocks away. And so I'm a serious happy camper. And I'm a big fan. I went through old files that we got out of our storage unit, and I came across some sermons of Ken Witt's that I preached in my church in Granville back in like 1988.
Wow. The cosmic scope of the Christian venture and the corruption of the womb of God.
Yeah, well, I've actually got several of them. I was surprised that I still had that file, so I was delighted.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Brian, are you still there? We can't see your picture, but
yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. So this is not new. This is, so for everyone else that doesn't know besides Ken, my wife and I live on Vashon Island in Washington State. So this is why you are seeing no picture. And it comes and it goes. The last Zoom meeting I did actually with my physician, the same thing happened. So I was able to, be there the whole time, but we could never get the picture back. So I am Brian Jackson. I was actually invited to this based on an article I'd written. I'm a contributing writer for the Christian Citizen. So I'd written an article back in the spring on eco-theology. And just a point of clarification, Ken had mentioned in the email that I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation. I am not a tribal citizen. I'm a registered descendant. There's a difference. I am active with my community, which is the Mountain Hood Cherokees, which is an official satellite community of the Cherokee Nation. and love this group. We actually have a lot of the same concerns as what we were talking about here. So I was ordained in the American Baptist Churches 20 years ago. I'm a rare bird in that I really have had little to do with the ABC, and that really was not voluntary. Other jobs came my way, for example, in the Episcopal Church. And I was a pastoral counselor in private practice, which I loved dearly. That's probably my favorite aspect of ministry. I've been in hospital chaplaincy, so that kind of gives you an idea. And I would just say, as far as the two things related to this, if I spent a lot of time last night thinking about this naturally, and animal agriculture is a big one for me. It is my understanding it is the main source of depletion on this earth. And I actually am vegan. I am plant-based. And I actually became that way because of my health. And over the past year, the obvious ethical implications have, become apparent to me. So that's something that I give a lot of attention to as well. And the other piece of this is just unsustainable healthcare as we have it today. So those are two things that when you compare it with things like fossil fuels and the other, if I'm not careful, I can make enemies very quickly. So I have to basically guard what I say when it comes to animal agriculture and unsustainable healthcare, because these are very, very touchy subjects, but they are dear to my heart. I have a lot of a history of a lot of health issues. So that's where the healthcare piece comes in. So that's basically me. I hope you can still hear what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm going to, just so you know, I'm going to try in just a minute to relocate into the living room and get closer to the router. So hopefully I'll come back.
Thanks, Brian.
Terrific, Brian. Thank you so much. In the early part of calling this gathering, I sent you a little letter that I called a population problem. And I introduced it by talking about the feral cats that live in our neighborhood, that Kathy loves like they were her children. And maybe that's exactly spiritually, emotionally how it is. And then I used that to talk about the grief we go through as we look at the crisis of the world, and I'm totally convinced that that to deal well with all the current issues, we're going to be traveling through all kinds of feelings. And for a while, some days we're going to be dealing with sadness, grief, anger, and another day we're going to wake up and say life is really beautiful. And hopefully our grandkids are going to be with us on that day as we teach them to love the creation and love God and love the work they can do in the world. But I conclude that by saying something about part of my purpose for this gathering, part of what motivates me. I have a different agenda than many of you. I am not a denominational leader, for example. I am not working on the front that Dan's wife and Betsy are working on in terms of political, economic issues. I am working in a whole variety of ways on building the kinds of sustainable communities which we all need, which the future is going to need to make a difference in the world. And what I long to do among American Baptists is to find those leaders who are out there on the front lines, either in churches or in social justice ministries, but are feeling isolated and disconnected, and create a support community where we can come together on a regular basis and back each other up, learn together, and so that nobody out there who really is aware of how precarious our situation is and might be very much frightened about it can honor that fear, honor the grief that they feel, and find a place to belong. I would highlight that by simply saying that when I was guided by Michael to read the book Overshoot by William Caton Jr., he warned me that it would be shocking and told me that I could call him when I needed to. And we could talk this through. And over the next year, so I probably called him 4 or 5 times for that specific reason, just to process with someone who knew and had worked through some of the things before. I've also listened to many podcasts by people who've done the same thing, and there's a lot of really good material out there, and there are incredible writers. So when I ask you all to look at this chart, and our next part of our conversation is to identify how we see the urgency of these matters. And it gives you not only a way to look at the urgency, but also the different ways that you can respond to that urgency. And we don't all have to be in the same place. And that's part of the whole deal that I hope we'll be understanding as we go through this gathering, that we're all at different places and we have different callings. And mine will be different than yours in my approach, but we have to respect and really honor where everyone is on the journey and what they feel the Spirit calling them to be about in terms of how they handle the urgency of our times. So I want, if you've got that chart in front of you, I want to say clearly as my own answer that I am 100%, 99.9% convinced that we have already passed a lot of the tipping points, that the urgency is beyond what we're able to fix, and that we are in a stage where we need to learn how to adapt to predicaments and prepare the people we love to adapt to predicaments rather than fixing the broken systems. I believe that the global world economic system is broken. I believe that the medical and agricultural systems are broken beyond repair. And so my calling is to walk with the community of folk who are at that point. It's not everybody, but those who will read my book and not disagree with my conclusions, because I don't try in what I've written to convince anybody that I'm right. I just share what I've experienced and what I believe and then what I'm doing. And so people who love their grandkids and know that their grandkids are heading towards a perilous future where they're going to need to adapt, I'm hoping people in that place would want to build a community, and that we would help to now that may be able to happen online for quite a while. It may end up being in our local communities. So I'm working on that up here in the hills of southeastern Ohio with the community where I live, and with an interracial, multi-ethnic congregation in Columbus, and especially with my extended family. And so that's kind of my answer to the 3 minutes I'm supposed to spend talking about that chart and where I fall on it. So again, you're welcome to pick up the conversation and kind of help you identify where you are in this whole scheme of things as to the level of the urgency you feel and what you're being called to do within that context.
Yeah, that's great, Ken. As you know, the word urgency no longer sort of rings as something that's front and center for me. I think it's way, way too late to be urgent. I think now is the time to prioritize on what matters most, the people we love, the communities we love, ground ourselves in life as a divine gift, to try to simplify our lives, simplify our lifestyles, make choices, recognizing that there is a very, very real possibility that our children and grandchildren will not grow to be our age or anything close to it. there's a very, very real possibility that we could see, half the population of humanity, 3 or 4 or more billion people starving in the next 10 years due to multi-breadbasket failure. And these are things that nobody wants to hear. So I find myself really focusing on ministers and theologians and activists and people who have done the grief work when they've recognized that, oh, we're into an abrupt climate change era. This is now out of our control. It's now runaway. It's in God's hands, life's hands, the universe's hands. So how do we support each other in expressing care, compassion, generosity? How do we trust and not be frustrated with our friends and relatives who may have a different worldview or in one or another form of denial, whether it's denial on the right, climate change isn't real, or denial on the left, all we need to do is shift to renewables. Denial is a normal human mechanism, that it's, and people are gonna be in denial. And I was in denial from 2000 to 2012. So I can hardly fault people for that. So my work for the last year and for the foreseeable future is really in the realm of post-doom and post-gloom. Like once you get the bad news and you get the really bad news, which is it could even mean extinction, and certainly is going to mean the collapse of the industrial civilization as we know it. How do we have healthy relationships, healthy families, healthy communities, and how do we support each other? Because I believe that especially now with the COVID triggering, we're in the early stages of the greatest mental health crisis in human history. And so those of us who are in ministry, those of us who are counselors, therapists, priests, rabbis, ministers, we have, I think, an important role to play as our congregations can be a little more prepared than the larger community. So when the larger community starts freaking out and realizing that, oh, we're not going to transform the systems. Oh, we're not going to become sustainable as a global industrial civilization. There are pockets of communities, religious communities, that can help people deal with this from a place of Christ-likeness, pro-future, generous, loving, love in action. I prefer love in action to activism. So postdoom.com is where I'm doing this main thing, all the conversations I've been having, the resources. And I'm in conversation with others about sort of how to further this so that it gets much, much broader. So this whole post-doom and post-gloom perspective.
Geez, Mike, I'm not sure I know who's going to go next.
Well, this is a very interesting conversation. And I appreciate Michael and Ken for what you just shared, because I think I can't speak for the Creation Justice Network group, but I don't think we have addressed this post-doom, post-gloom possibility or actually predictable reality yet. Those of you who know me, I am an eternal optimist. When I looked at the 4 stages of climate change, I was hoping that it was still at the urgency, but I think it's close to crisis, if not already crisis. But I wasn't ready to go to collapse, I have to say. But the Bay Area, as well as Portland, made national news a week ago. And that orange sky is true. It wasn't a hoax. And the word that described what we experienced for 24 hours was apocalyptic. And so many of us, particularly in faith communities, started to say, maybe this is something that we have to address. It's not something that we are wishfully thinking is not true. So I want to just say thank you, Michael and Ken, and perhaps others who are already tracking in that direction. I think that's a reality check for me, I know, and perhaps others, to look at this probability as what do we need, as some of you have already said, to adapt? How can we lead into that adapting mode for not just survival, but for meaningful living?
Amen.
What is that going to look like?
Yes.
Now, I don't know about you, but you know, I have Amazon Prime Video, I have Netflix, I have Hulu, and movies of dystopia is very attractive to me, as well as to perhaps some of you, because it kind of sends a message about where we are heading. And I you know, I love utopian, but I think that dystopia picture is becoming more visible, if not seeing more clearly. And so I don't know where I'm going to end up in my response, but I just want to say thank you for waking me up to that, because I think that's real. And this chart of these 4 places sends a very starking picture or message that I believe we need to address.
Don, let me say very quickly that this chart and the message behind it came from to us from I think a former American Baptist missionary, Ricardo. Help me, Tom. What's his full name?
Ricardo Mayor.
Mayo. Yeah.
He's the current missionary in Guatemala.
Right, and he's current. Okay, so he wrote me from Guatemala last night, but he sent us this document, and it looks at all of this from the point of view of indigenous peoples, and it's a phenomenal piece to educate us as to where a lot of the solution lies, and a lot of it lies by becoming more like the indigenous peoples. And then there's much more material on that that's available when you're ready to look at it. But that article is astounding. I consider it one of the very best pieces I've ever read.
So I would like to jump in after my friend Don. He and I might easily enter a competition for which of us is the most congenital optimist. And I also have to say, with no criticism toward Ricardo or Ken or anybody, I have a visceral aversion to multiple choice exercises. I think that structures, even multi-trillion-dollar structures like a global economy based on industrial agriculture, fossil fuel, et cetera, are much more fragile than those, not just those who are the captains of those structures think, but those who live within those structures. And I think that change is much more sudden than we normally think, that what seems impervious, like a global trade and culture Berlin Wall, when it reaches a tipping point, can go down in a few hours to assault from sledgehammers and pickaxes and young activists. I'm old enough to have grandchildren. I don't yet. And that may be part of something that's happening in a global culture of youth and young adults. My 2 children are highly educated and both living lives, one single, one married, of almost Spartan simplicity by choice. I referenced earlier, I've had a long career both in pastoral ministry and theological education. Currently, I'm teaching with Palmer Seminary on an internet platform, something I would never have imagined doing before, because how can you do something as personal as ministry training via the internet? But in the last going on 3 years,
make sure you unmute yourself.
I've been teaching students in Mexico, Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, and also in the US, everywhere from California to the Bronx. And some of these students are millennials or Generation Z, like my own children. Some of these students are baby boomers, like many of us, although Mexican folk don't tend to use that language. That's a USA idiom. And almost without reservation or without exception, from the most progressive to the most conservative theologically, creation care is at the front of their agendas as pastors and leaders in the church, simply because if you're living in 21st century Mexico City, El Distrito Federal, or if you're living in 21st century Bolivia on the western edge of a burning Amazon, or if you're living in Chiapas, you have to be concerned with creation care in order to survive. So it's not a niche subject, it's the frame in which they do traditional Baptist or evangelical things like evangelization and Bible study. So I think that change, for better or for worse, happens much more quickly. It can happen as quickly as the West Coast catching on fire and our breathing smoke for 10 days. And with a change in the weather next week, we may be breathing smoke again. Or it can happen as quickly as the dolphins swimming through industrial ports on the Mediterranean during the early days of Europe's coronavirus lockdown. So I'm going to resist my natural optimism, but also resist too much pessimism, and just as a pastor and a teaching theologian, share the ride with my students and also my children. And I think we'll be surprised. If God is God, I hope that we'll come to Zion bringing in the sheaves more sooner than we think. That's enough. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Dave, so much.
Oh gosh, what to start with? I say that the chart was cut off on my copy for some reason. I couldn't see half of the last column, but I got the idea, the picture.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
That I'm pretty sure that's where I am. But I would say I don't see an either or between fighting on the front lines to make it, to avoid the worst, which we can still do.
Yes.
And developing resilient communities at the same time.
Right.
And that's, I don't know if that was shared with this group yet, the Alliance of Baptist Creation Justice statement that I wrote a couple of years ago.
You sent it to me, and it's another huge, very good piece.
Yeah, because it really, there's this tendency, I think, for churches to create a green team and then focus ourselves on, greening the church and driving Priuses and recycling and all of those, that personal purity stuff, which is all good, well and good, but that's not justice. And I just want to flag that I want to flag our privilege, including mine, that it's really tempting to want to cocoon with, the people around us and go someplace safe and save, save our grandkids. I mean, my son and daughter-in-law are expecting our first grandchild, and they live in LA, and she's been breathing this stuff, and I'm terrified. You know, this should be a time where I'm overjoyed because we're expecting our first grandchild, and I'm just completely terrified that for this child's life and health, and for her life and health. And you know, that's just one example of all the millions of people who have been dealing with this stuff in environmental justice communities for generations. You know, it's like for at least more than 50 years, it's been, you know, if you want to find a toxic waste dump, if you want to find a Superfund site, you look for the race of the people who live in the zip code, and that's where you find them. So I don't feel like I have permission to do only the let's build some, you know, resilient communities stuff, although we do need to do that too. And we need to build resilient communities that center the people who are being impacted first and worst, and are led by them, and go and say, okay, how can we build resilient community together, and how can we help? So that's kind of where I am as an overview. And the Alliance statement was also part of that, is sort of getting churches not to just deal with the personal purity and the church building, but to kind of mainstream climate justice into everything, into the theology, into the preaching, into the Christian ed, into the pastoral care. Because like Don, I think already said, somebody said, Owen, about the mental health crisis and the climate grief that we have to deal with. But then that frontline work is still a part of it. And I think, like was also said, I think, David, about the tipping points. I think we were really at some tipping points. I think the election may be the tipping point. I mean, we're really, I mean, everything could really fall apart, which if you were a first Christian in the first century, you'd be saying, yeah, let it fall, you know. But on the other hand, you know, we're the ones, you know, well, everyone, there's going to be terrible suffering in that. So how do we face the cross? But the other tipping points that we're getting is we're starting to see the banks and the insurers refuse to invest anymore or insure anymore the fossil fuel companies. There's that whole turning, the great turning narrative that is the counter to the great collapse narrative. So it just feels to me like I have to be part of pushing the turning, as well as trying to be part of building that beloved community in those little islands. So I had a couple of resources I wanted to mention with that, as Ken was talking at the beginning. And I put in the chat a workshop next week online from CREW, Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, which actually is around the headquartered around the corner from Old Cambridge Baptist Church, but they are national. And they are trying to build resilience hubs all across the country, not only churches and synagogues and all, it's also secular, but they do have a component. In fact, one of their leaders is a pastor, that they're working with religious communities, some who are able to use their actual buildings as shelters in emergencies and things like that. And some, there are just the different levels of being involved in that, from just being making commitments to educate your congregation and small things like that, to being available in a climate emergency to have like charging stations for people to come in and charge their electronics, or that sort of thing, all the way up to being major shelters. So that's one thing to look at. And there should be a link that in the event I sent you should take you to their website as well. OCBC read a year ago, summer, a book by Margaret Wheatley called Who Do We Choose to Be? Which and the big theme in that is she writes about islands of sanity, which sounds like just what some of us are talking about, and how to create. And it's not a theological book, but it's a good book for churches to read because you just bring your theology to it, and how to go about when you can't just your little community alone is not going to change these massive systems, even though you're engaged in it, but how to go about building these communities. And at OCBC, we try to not get into the place of like saying, putting like, this is going to be a community we put a wall around and we stay safe inside it in our privilege, but it's an island of sanity onto which, to quote the book of Acts, the people from the shipwrecks can still come ashore on the broken pieces and join us on the island. That this island of sanity is an open island, and then you connect with people on the other islands and network and grow things. And I guess back to the action piece. Another thing we're doing at OCBC along with some other folks is we just started on Sunday with a series of 4 weeks of nonviolence training running up to the election, because that's been something I've been called to do in the past, is really out getting out there and putting our bodies in what do they call putting our bodies in the gears of the machine, and sometimes we have to do that. So and then just church being that one of those islands of sanity. This conversation we were having last night around Cody's pastoral letter. So one of the church leaders was saying that how important church is right now, because we have this tradition of thousands of years of faithful people dealing with terrible crises and passing along their wisdom and sometimes their mistakes of how they have dealt with that. And it's been just really critical for people to have that rootedness. So I think that's a gift that we have as people of faith, that so many people are, again, back to the mental health crisis, seeing everything fall apart and just having no roots and no island of sanity to stand on in the face of it. So that's a huge, the opportunity of things that, the gift of being alive right now, the gift and the challenge. Perhaps we've been called to the kingdom for such a time as this,
Yeah. Amen, Betsy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Betsy. Betsy, you mentioned the Great Turning, and you also mentioned Meg Wheatley. I put into the chat box a link to my the post-Doom conversations with both Margaret Wheatley and with Joanna Macy and a few others as well. They're all accessible from that link, but the two videos that I linked are a distillation of 7.5 years of studying all this stuff and trying to distill it in the most digestible form possible. So you may find that useful.
I have literally listened to dozens of those conversations in the car. And for the most part, they are a way that I stay grounded, that it's possible to tell the truth about reality, what's going on in the world, and feel hope and joy immensely at the same time, and have a great time with your grandchildren, and do something the same day to make the world better, to save more for the kids. It's pretty an amazing thing. It's all part, but it's all part of what we believe reality is all about for Christians: resurrection, death, resurrection, construction, destruction. It's all
compost theology.
Do you all know Kathleen D. Moore too? Great Tide Rising. I think it's my favorite climate.
She's awesome. She's awesome.
I just love it.
Yeah.
Who's next?
I just want to be, I'll be quick. I am in that doom place too, and dealing with this for such a long time. But I want to just speak really quickly about being a pastor in a local church and dealing with a lot of different, not in an interfaith basis, the same thing. We are we are there. We are there, but I would say the majority of our American Baptist churches are not. And to come in, we have to somehow help pastors and other leaders of churches to come in to be able to bring this. There are churches that don't even talk about, they don't talk about anything. And so to bring that, to bring that in on wherever they are, wherever people are, and move that. The church I'm in right now, I've been there about 7.5 years. We were not recycling when I came. I walked in the building and about 2 months later said, where are the recycling baskets? But now we've, over time, that have had to come in and bombarded with everything, that kind of thing. The second thing I just want to bring up quickly is that I think for religious communities and for us, it is about a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
We shape a mindset. And I was in 2008, went to, Al Gore has this thing, the Climate Project. I went there with, 100 religious leaders in that. And it was wonderful and all that. But what they were doing, they didn't talk about the mindset. It was all about replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy, which is, for me, it's great. But it had nothing to do with, we're looking at the world exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the most important thing in my 36 years of ordained ministry that we do, is that we help shape a mindset. So when people say, do you preach every week on climate change and that? I said, no, but every single service, there is something. And it is about the water on the rock. And I know we don't have time for the water on the rock.
Still the right thing.
We have to do both of those things. We have to have this incredible urgency, but also change the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to put that out.
Thanks, Tom.
And Tom, I'm really hoping we can identify folk that may not be able to say everything or do everything in churches, but have this new mindset and want to find support so that we can be a community together and not feel alone.
Well, absolutely.
Anyway.
There's a lot of those folks out there. A lot of people out there.
Yeah, I agree. What Tom is saying is really resonating with me. And I think it's part of the reason why the Creation Justice Network established the Creation Justice Congregations program, was to help congregations, and still is, to help congregations enter into this mindset and start the conversations, or to further engage and enrich the ministries that they're already doing with creation justice. We have lots of congregations across our denomination right now who do partake and engage passionately with creation justice and creation care ministries, but no one's talking to each other. So we don't know. So the Creation Justice Network launched the Creation Justice Congregations program at the Biennial in Virginia Beach in 2019. And we currently have one Creation Justice congregation. So Royersford Baptist Church in Royersford, Pennsylvania is now an official Creation Justice congregation. But we are looking for more, and we think it's going to be an important resource and an important community for congregations to be a part of. In order, oh, awesome, Betsy, thank you so much. She said she's gonna talk to OCBC about the Creation Justice program with Creation Justice congregations. So I think it will be a great place for people to have Zoom meetings like this, or when we can organize regionally and locally. And I think part of that too, TABCOM, the American Baptist Churches in Massachusetts, used to have a minister for creation care. They no longer do. But I think that that's also important to emphasize with each of the regions, to have a local presence of creation justice and creation care. It's so important because, like Tom said, there are congregations who don't talk about this at all. And each congregation, each community is going to have their own entry point. And how do we present this, and how do we create conversations and create action without overwhelming people, so they say, oh no, I don't want to be a part of that at all, or I don't understand, or, you know, so I'm really interested in how to foster and nurture and cultivate these conversations and these actions and these places where people feel safe exploring and they don't feel pushed out because they're not at the same place as other people.
Yeah. Actually,
I wonder if
Rebecca-
I could say one thing quickly in response to Rebecca.
Sure, David.
You know, since I left the senior minister position at First Baptist Portland and returned to teaching full time, I've been engaging with a small congregation, American Baptist congregation in our neighborhood in Portland. It's very progressive. But when I spoke with the leadership about front loading creation justice and what we were doing, the first response was, sure, how can you help us? But then the demonstrations in response to George Floyd's death kicked in earnest. And this small congregation and lots of others of my most progressive faith friends in Portland have been totally caught up in the struggle for racial justice. And I can't fault that. But what I've tried to say in my own writing and teaching as a Christian is that the climate crisis must be the frame in which all other ethical issues are understood, and in which all plans and actions that we undertake as individuals and congregations must be understood. And since Tom and I have had a lot of conversation about that, I heard that, not in those words, but I heard that in the way that he described his own preaching and leadership and the life of his own congregation. Every single thing that we think about and do must take place in the framework of creation, care, and climate justice, or in the framework, if you will, of honoring the God of creation by honoring creation.
When I first read that article, I immediately posted it. It's right up behind me so that I wouldn't lose it. It's just such a good piece. And Rebecca, I wanted to say, I know this is part of why we're gathering today, but even before we got online, I was trying to identify the churches that I know, knowing we were going to talk today, the churches I know where I can send a letter and update them about this program. Because I suspect a lot of churches haven't even taken a look at it. So I have friends who are pastors in churches that I used to pastor where I can make sure they get the information. And that's one of the things we all can help you do.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think too, to talk to David's point a little bit, part of the issue is that we, as the environmental movement or climate change movement, is not very diverse. There aren't a lot of people of color or Black communities involved, but they are the ones who are being most affected and impacted by environmental degradation. And so how do we talk about it that, like, yes, the protests are important because these are the people who are being most effective, and that connection between racial justice and environmental justice, because it is there.
At our multi-ethnic church, we are trying to find a way to take the racial justice issues and the climate issues and everything else and understand them in a very large and complex storyline, because everything is connected. There's no way that you can deal with one issue and not impact the others or have the other ones get in the way. So we have to deal with a very complex storyline. But there's often very simple responses that we can do. Like if you don't know the whole story, if you don't see the big picture, your actions probably aren't going to work.
Yeah, this is why, sorry to interrupt, this is why it was it a year and a half ago, Don and David, that we went to, it was halfway between Flint and Detroit, and dealt with, we had the frontline workers, water. What are the water warriors? Is that what they?
It'll actually soon be 2 years.
Yeah,
water warriors.
Yeah, the water warriors, and it was a very clear connection. It was profound.
Yeah.
Who were affected, the poor and the weak, and that that kind of. So, I was thinking about that when I was thinking of the map of Michigan there. By the way, Dan, my daughter lives in Traverse City and is a nurse.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that same thing too. Like I agree with David about the framing, that for me, everything is framed by the climate crisis and environmental justice. But I'm working with these folks who are trying to work at the intersection of climate and racial justice in my church. And I was just having a conversation the other day with one of our members who is Black, and he was saying, like, the frame for everything has to be, racial justice. Yeah, and I'm not going to tell him that's the wrong frame for him, but we both agreed that the two are intimately connected, and that's the point. So I was going to say, that I've had to be aware of not imposing the frame that is so obvious to me on people who have a different frame, but agree that that they're all connected, because his life is completely, engaged in the struggle for racial justice as it should be, but he totally gets that's with climate justice. And I think for our framing, over the past several years, I've said things like climate justice and environmental justice, and explained to parse the difference to people, because a lot of white people in the movement just talk about climate justice and climate change and carbon and extinction and all of that, but the environmental justice, as you all know, is a subset of that, but it's a huge subset, and it's a terrific way of engaging. And in fact, that's the way I ended up engaging OCBC, because I was away being a pastor's wife for a lot of years, and a UCC pastor's wife. And when I came back, they thought they were this big green church, but even though there was this hugely justice-oriented progressive church, they had been, as many people have been, because of all the propaganda, tricked into thinking that environmental stuff was all this personal purity business. And and it was weird about how green the building was and how green they all were and how they were all vegetarians and all this stuff. And then we did a book group and read Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything together. And it was like the little light bulbs went off and people went, oh my God, it's a justice issue. Kind of. So, just making those kind of connections and starting with the frames that people already have, I think is really helpful. And then saying, okay, this is how climate justice fits with the other justice things that you are already engaged in and you already care about. And for churches that don't care about any kinds of justice ministries, that's a heavier lift. But I think there's a lot of churches that do care about a lot of human rights and civil rights and women's rights and LGBTQ rights and all that, but that haven't made that jump to understand climate as a justice issue. So that
I am aware that there are still a few others who haven't shared.
Oh yeah, I will mute and
no, but I also want to interject that this conversation is triggering in me that perhaps we need to think even more critically, or perhaps more holistically, about the kind of framing that we need to be in touch with. Having received all of my Western education in Boston, I am very analytic. But when I went to San Francisco and learned that there was Asian theology, I had to relearn a whole nother way of looking at the world. So my challenge to not just you, but also to myself is that as long as we are still trying to break down these different pieces and to justify from which framing we are coming from, we're still not thinking holistically.
Yeah.
And the article that Ken sent to us talks a lot more about how we are all interconnected. So I guess my point is that, and getting back to Tom's point, our mindset is not tracking in a way that can help not only ourselves, but our local churches, how to approach this topic that would lead to not only major changes in our outlook, but how we can then change the world. Because, you know, as you heard, our governor just says by 15 years from now, we're going to have non-gasoline cars in California. Well,
Not going to be in California.
well, that's just yet another technical change.
Mhm.
It's not
Yeah, right.
really addressing
Right.
the change of heart, the change of mind, the change of lifestyle. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's where I just want to kind of input here, because, and I want to call upon Owen Owens, because I think he embodies for me a lot more of that person who is living a lifestyle that is holistic. And that's what I'm searching for as well.
Owen, would you like to talk at this point?
Well, I've been listening, and wondering what would be helpful to share. I think one thing that the leaders of the future in the United States will probably be African American and Native American Indian, and also probably Hispanic, because these folks have experienced hundreds of years of the kind of despairing, destructive institutional realities that we're now seeing as white people is going to happen very quickly. And it's been my experience that our job then is to look for people who have a vision and a power and are able to move forward and back them. And because as white people, we have gifts to offer, just like African American and Native American Indian people and all people, women and men. And they're unique and distinct in terms of our own experience. So that would be one point. A second point is that in the Religious Coalition for Creation Care, which Fred Krueger and a lot of other folks have sparked over the years, one of the keys to it is the protocol that was created, which is a process protocol. It means encouraging each person to share and pray out of the depths of their tradition, not to reduce what they think and feel so that it will be acceptable, to homogenize, in other words. And you do this in a respectful way where you say what you're thinking and feeling and listen to other people. I think that process has enabled things to happen through that group, which are pretty amazing, because it's enabled Jewish people and conservative evangelicals to make a dent at certain points. The third thing I think that I've learned from Reverend John Cook, who is a Navajo leader and minister, as we work together, is around the framework of his clan's blessing way ceremony, which is the Navajo, it centers on healing coyote. And as I've worked with John, the thing that has baffled me is, how do you heal people who are like old coyotes, who only are looking for advantage, how they can gain advantage over others and get and eat them up. And of course, one thinks of Cortez, one thinks of Columbus, one thinks of some people who are among us today, but they beat down others and they, in order to build themselves up. It's very simple. It's boring actually when one looks at it. But I think that Navajo understanding of how to get in balance crops up again and again in American life in the way that it's affected white people. And I think we can learn from that. I think another area that stands out as critical to me is Bible study, prayer, which are elemental to the whole Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal tradition. When people are pressed, and in our church life and our daily life, prayer, Bible study, and communities shaped by biblical teaching are elemental. And this has largely been lost in many ways from America and from Europe also, but it's still elemental. And I've spent a lot of time since I retired studying the Bible, and from an ecology justice point of view, what does the scripture have to say to us? What is God saying to us through the scripture that opens up doors for us? And a couple things recently stand out. One is that we need to understand, we need to recognize Jesus. And that means that we need to recognize how much of white European American understanding of Jesus is a breaking of the second commandment. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, which we see as we know Jewish people. How many Jewish people in Europe didn't even want to walk past the church because it was the church that was the source of the persecution, the anti-Semitism. And we also see the way that the KKK used the name of Christ in vain. So, but there's a deeper understanding of Christ, which is the one who is the Redeemer, who is the suffering servant. And I think in that service, he teaches us that we're to pick up our own crosses and follow him, because there's always a price when you move toward what is good and right. I think that one of the key scholars that I've struggled with for the last 2 years is Margaret Barker, and her two books. One is this one on creation, the other on temple mysticism, deal with a suppressed but real tradition throughout all of Scripture that is based in the creation covenant. It's brilliant work. Probably wouldn't have ever been done by man. That'd be done by a woman, I think. And I don't know how she ever did it, but it's brilliant work and difficult. I think the only other thing I'd say is that I've learned a great deal from getting involved in stream conservation, which happened, and I think this is a key to the church, because Jutsu Morikawa preached a sermon in which he said every religious professional should be involved at some point in the life of their community to make it a better place to live. Now, I never heard that sermon. Madison Bittner, who was the evangelism leader, conservative evangelical in Illinois, told me about hearing the sermon and shared the effect it had on his life. It changed his life. He started a community organization to help children who were like his nephew, who had learning, physical problems. And he told me, and it changed my life. And then getting involved in it and stream conservation and seeing the things aren't as difficult. Miracles happen every day, genuine acts of God. And I think that it's been baffling to me how to bring this back into the church. But those are just some things that stand out in our conversations today that I wanted to share. I think a right time is coming, and that the Lord is going to move to open a way into a relatively more just and ecologically whole world. I think there will be tremendous losses, and it will, we don't want that to happen, but I think we have to accept it. We can't, there's no way through except the cross, I think. And so anyway, that's where I am today, kind of.
Thanks, Owen, and
So,
Don, thanks for making sure you got a chance to talk, Tom. Dan, are you the only person who hasn't addressed this?
I don't know if Brian has or not.
Yeah,
have
I need to just apologize. I promised my daughter I would go over and take care of my granddaughter at
Ah.
4:30 Eastern time.
Bye,
So,
Michael.
I'm glad this is being recorded. I'll watch the end of it when I get the link to the recording. Thank you, Ken. Thank all of you. And it's great to
Take
see
care,
you
Michael.
again for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
be in touch, neighbor. Okay, so, I have a good excuse for not being able to respond to the chart because I've been busy reading a manuscript called God is Just Love that somebody wrote, and I'm supposed to write an introduction to this book. So I'm working on that deadline, and so sorry I didn't get to it, Ken. But a few things just to respond and add into the discussion that we've got. You know, Sharon and I came up with a message, and I won't get into it all, but it's centered on the phrase from Zechariah 9, prisoners of hope. And, you know, when we were talking about doom versus optimism, et cetera, we found that very, very powerful. And as we dealt with it, prisoners of hope have to do with reality. And it's kind of anchored with the reality that you're there. But we kind of tied that with Bonhoeffer, whoever speaks the truth cynically is lying. And the tendency to fall as we become aware of just how grim a lot of stuff is. And so that's a theme that we've been working on a lot. Was Rebecca, you were talking about the kind of the people that you know and some of the congregations you know and trying to pull them together. It reminds me of the early years of the Baptist Peace Fellowship and when we started connecting to one another. In fact, we knew each other as pastors in Boston. There's another Boston connection here. I was pastor in Dorchester, lived in Ashmont Station, the other end of the red line from you all, Betsy. And we passed each other in a nuclear freeze protest. And we knew each other from church, but we didn't know this part of who we were. And it's kind of like, wow, you're here too? And it was very, very exciting and energizing. And we've talked about communities being part of empowering one another. And I think that's a plus and really necessary to do that, and I'm going to say more about that. But one of the things that happens when we do that is that we can develop the synergy where we can start thinking outside the box and come up with things that we can do and ways that we can do community, ways we can respond to some of the crises. My very job that is, I feel, been God's reason for putting me on this earth, what I've been doing the last 17 years, my global peacemaking and training and all this kind of stuff, just amazing stuff. It did not even exist in Baptist circles. There was nothing like it, but it was through the Peace Fellowship and some of the synergy of our ideas coming together that we, created stuff. So it's very, very exciting to see that happen. And so that's one of the things I'm hopeful that this network might do. A second thing, and it's kind of been referred to in some of these other things, is that and I was a colleague with Owen at the time, we developed a Peace Sunday, and we let people know we had some resources. And so I think at that time, it was not quite 6,000 ABC churches. We maybe had 35 or 50 that asked for the resources, and kind of big whoop, a lot. But then we started sending it out to everybody. Got the resources to everybody. And then one time we couldn't do that, we had over 1,000 churches ask for the resources. That it really, through our engagement in a more assertive way with the resources that we had, we found that it was making a bigger impact in the denomination. And so that might be something to consider. We've got Earth Day already there, but what kind of resources, the Bible studies that Owen was talking about, how to connect our faith in a way that mobilizes us to be light and salt at this time of the world. And that's a tough journey because we also feel that despair, and I'm a grandparent, one grandchild. Our other two children may not have any children. We're kind of looking at that issue as well. And there's a part of me that says, wonderful, they won't be exposed to the horrible stuff that's coming down the pike. But I love Lily, and so I kind of, the agony of that beautiful love. So I carry her in my heart when I'm, doing protests and so on. But the last thing I'd like to mention is from my global experience is that even though I was doing peacemaking in so many places, we were dealing with ecological issues. And I remember being in a remote area of Kenya, and we had somebody coming that shared also some of the ecological stuff. And I thought the engagement with this person and the people from this rural community, I thought, I haven't seen this in the US. I haven't seen this level of engagement in supposedly, we're the leading country and all that kind of stuff. But there's other parts of the world that are far more engaged with what's happening in terms of climate change and the impact locally. And one of my colleagues who's kind of replacing me is from Zimbabwe, Lance Mateo, and his organization is called Trees of Peace Africa, and he started in ecology and has expanded into peacemaking, but keeps the two together and sees them very much as a part of what's going to be part of the deal, because as we go through these calamities, violence is going to be a big part of the temptation for humanity.
Dan, can I say one thing in terms of your work with peacemaking? And that is the other component that is very important in Western industrial society is revolution. And Calvin and Calvinists played a major role, as did Protestants, in the early revolutions. And as we saw them come down, we also saw how revolution, which didn't end up with a constitution, ended up in war and tyranny and murder, mass murder in terms of Hitler and Stalin. And I think that as the market, which is the ordering premise of industrial society, the market, if that breaks apart, and that was Karl Polanyi's point, you can't organize a human and ecological world around a market because it breaks down at its strongest points, the market does. And I think your work on peace is one of the elemental realities that will make a difference as we move into this new era.
Let's go to Brian. Brian, I hope you're still with us.
Yeah, am I coming in?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You sound good.
Good to know. With respect to the chart, I find myself going back and forth between crisis and collapse. And I don't think I'm ready to embrace the collapse at this point. And that it just puts me in mind of two things. And I think the reason I'm saying that is in Cherokee tradition, the number 7 is traditionally significant. Mm-hmm. What can we do day in and day out to make the earth a better place for the next 7 generations? And that's basically how I try to live. The former principal chief Wilma Mankiller used to talk about being of a good mind. And, let's face it, we're all experienced clergy. We know how incredibly difficult that can be. But this idea of the dystopian factor, again, I think the reason I struggle with the doom piece is because I think about my ancestors who were on the Cherokee Trail of Tears. And there is one in particular, her name was Mary. And when I was a pediatric chaplain in oncology, every time I had to go to the death of a child, or inform the parents of the death of a child. And you know how this, we all know this tends to happen at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I would say, what can I possibly say to these people? And Mary would come to me and say, I am with you. And just know that there have always been times like this. I can personally testify, I promise you, times have been worse. And I was thinking about that recently. My wife and I were cooped up in this house for 10 days. So that's a story in and of itself. But 10 days is a long time. And when you have breathing trouble to begin with, like I do, that sort of compounded it. But I would get sort of that visitation from her with the same message. So I think, how are we trying, what are we doing when we project doom? And how is that coming across to the people that we're trying to convert to our ideas of sustainability? So that's just something that's just popped into my head. And the second piece is, I am a family systems theory person. When I was doing pastoral psychotherapy, Bowen theory was my theoretical base. So I tend to think in terms of what in the window looking into the family, how can we start there? Not just with our churches and our congregations, but with our own families, which of course is probably the biggest challenge. And it made me think of, I was watching an interview recently, it was actually probably 3 or 4 days ago on YouTube with Denzel Washington. And I've seen a couple of those. I noticed that every time someone asks him about racial injustice, he avoids the pigmentation issue and says, I want to know where the fathers are. He says that every time. I want to know where the fathers are in this. And so I tend to think that as families, as a system, as an emotional unit, how can we project the needs of this society through the lens of the family? So those are two things that come to my mind. That, again, and the just the piece of not being able to make up my own mind about crisis or collapse.
Okay.
So
thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
We've gone 10 minutes past what we all agreed to get together for. I actually have an idea which kind of totally surprises me in the midst of everything else that's been said. I was really taken when Don talked a few minutes ago about the worldview. What words did you use to say that, Don? Our worldview. You didn't use worldview. That was my word. Anyway,
That's okay.
Okay. The article that we got from Ricardo Mayo, he's right now leading a group of events down in Guatemala that are they're going around the world. There's this community of indigenous peoples and so on that have invited the American Baptist Climate Justice Group to become affiliated with their efforts. There wasn't time, I'm sure, Tom, to actually buy into it because it's happening like yesterday and tomorrow. And but I'll be online for as long as we need next week with Ricardo, and I would like to decide that we'll get back together again, and that the focus of that is to have some folk like Ricardo, and you might have other ideas that you want to send to me that look at the worldview question. How do we understand the reality within which all of this is happening? What's the big picture? And simply have another gathering where we let some folk talk to us about that. Don't have anything shaped, it's just coming to mind now. I didn't even know for sure whether this group would want to get together again. But that's what's coming to mind, is that there are some people out there who've really considered that question of worldview, point of view, the big picture, pretty deeply, and are coming to conclusions as Ricardo does in his article, that it's a complex storyline. Many folk are going to go in different ways, but we need to engage in this ongoing, respectful conversation. Not solve problems, but to set people free to go and do what their spirits tell them is necessary. And of course, the Native American and indigenous peoples around the world have a very different way of looking at the creation, our relationship to the creation, and thus what's gone wrong in the 10,000 years where some people call not material. They have it starts with T, not transactional. Anyway, it's a way of describing industrial agricultural civilization that's been dominating the world for 10,000 years. Anyway, how does that sound that we would get together again for the purpose of having some folks help us look at that larger question of worldview?
Sounds good.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
Would we like to, each of us, consider another person that we'd like to enlarge the conversation? Or do we need to just stay where we are for a while?
I'm wondering if it's important to pull in the Creation Justice Network into this conversation, as they are the task force that was created by the denomination.
Absolutely great idea.
So
You and I can talk about that.
I can bring it to one of our steering committee meetings.
Okay,
We can chat about that.
terrific. Excellent.
So when I think about this, anyone that I might be inclined to bring into the conversation would be a Spanish speaker. And of course, Ricardo's a Spanish speaker, but he's bilingual. So he's equally adept at either English or Spanish. But the folks I'm dealing with most commonly now are Mexicans and Central Americans who speak only Spanish. So I don't know if down the road we are serious about including other voices, we may need to think about voices that aren't English speakers.
Yeah.
Well, I was already kind of thinking that as I talk with Ricardo, he's got a network of folks from Guatemala, Puerto Rico, El Salvador, wherever they're from, who could join the conversation and Ricardo or others could translate, so that we do hear from some actually indigenous folk from Guatemala or others that are doing the workshops that they're doing this week. I don't know how that would play out, but David, you've also mentioned a number of your students that would be good folks. So if you have one or two of those, I could easily get a conversation going. I speak pretty good Spanish, and of course, Microsoft will translate for me. So.
The interesting thing that I found with some of my students is for them, even Spanish is a second language. But you know, that's the world in which we live.
Yep.
I just want to say that I found today very stimulating because this is a theological roundtable. And I'm not suggesting that we don't do anything beyond that, but in contrast to the work of the Creation Justice Network task force that has been in place, which has primarily focused on programming, strategizing, recruiting, connecting with the denominational family about what Creation Justice is all about, which seems to me is more of a implementation practical approach. Contrasting that to what we just experienced, I think is very stimulating.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that the other members of the task force could be encouraged to come on, but I just want to say that I enjoyed the theological conversation because that has been missing in my own experience with the Creation Justice main point. So I am going to go off because I have to go to another phone conversation, but yes, I will look forward to having another invitation.
I will get back to you all.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go
Thank
too.
you, Ken.
Thank you.
Sounds
Thanks,
like it's
everybody.
time to end the conversation. Anybody want to stay on a minute that wants to talk to anybody a little longer, I'll stay with you, but people are checking out. So
Yeah,
goodbye.
I gotta go eat lunch.
Thank
Love you guys. I got to cook dinner.
Ken, thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you.
Yes,
Thank you,
thank you.
Ken.
Oh,
Thank you.
Been a gift to me that you would do this. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, I'm closing out. Bye, Rebecca.
So I think I'm just trying to think about the recording. So I will stop recording.